On January 15, 1919, the city of Boston was destroyed by a wave of syrup, not a metaphor, an actual wall of molasses, 2 stories tall, moving at 35 miles an hour. It killed 21 people, injured 150 more, and it sounds like the setup to a joke. It was not a joke. This is the Great Molasses Flood, and it is 100% real. To understand this, you need to know why a major city had a tank holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses in the first place. The answer is alcohol. Molasses wasn't just for baking. Back then, it was fermented and distilled into industrial alcohol, used to make rum, and more importantly, to make munitions. And in 1919, with World War I barely over, there was a lot of money in that. The tank belonged to the Purity Distilling Company, sitting in Boston's crowded North End, right next to homes, a fire station, and an elevated train line. It had been built in a hurry, in 1915 by a man who could not read a blueprint. The man overseeing construction, Arthur Gell, had no engineering training. He never tested the tank by filling it with water first. That would have been the obvious thing to do. Instead, when the finished tank groaned and leaked, he had it painted brown so nobody could see the molasses seeping out. The leaks were so steady that local kids would collect the dripping molasses in cans to take home. The tank was a disaster waiting for the right day to happen. That day came on January 15, 1919. It was unusually warm for January, around 40 degrees after days of brutal cold. The day before, the tank had been filled almost to the top with a fresh, warm shipment of molasses. The warmth made the molasses expand and ferment, building up gas and pressure inside an already weak tank. Witnesses later said they heard the rivets popping out of the steel like machine gun fire and felt the ground rumble. At around 12:40 in the afternoon, the tank tore itself apart. 2.3 million gallons of molasses burst out all at once in a wave that started out 25 feet high. Now here's the part people don't expect. Molasses is heavy and dense. A flood of it is far deadlier than a flood of water. The wave was so powerful, it snapped the steel supports of the elevated train line and lifted a train off its tracks. It crushed buildings off their foundations. It swept the local fire station off its base. People, horses, and entire wagons were thrown through the air and then trapped, unable to move as the molasses began to cool and thicken around them. And this is the cruelest detail. As the molasses cooled in the winter air, it turned thick and gluey like wet cement. The harder victims struggled, the more stuck they became. And rescuers who waded in to help often got trapped themselves. Sailors from a nearby ship, along with the Red Cross, police, and firefighters, rushed in. They worked for days, knee-deep in molasses, cutting people and horses free. The rescue was slow, exhausting, and grim, and the molasses got into everything. The victims were so completely coated in molasses that many were unrecognizable. Some bodies weren't found for days, and one wasn't recovered for nearly 4 months. The final count was 21 dead and around 150 injured. The molasses covered several blocks of the North End, in some places 2 to 3 feet deep, and then it just sat there, cooling, hardening, turning the entire neighborhood into a sticky brown trap that nobody could clean. It took more than 87,000 hours of cleanup. They used salt water from the harbor to break the molasses down, and even then the harbor ran brown for months. The whole city was sticky. Locals tracked it everywhere on their shoes, onto trains, into homes. What followed was one of the first big class action lawsuits in American history. Thousands of residents sued the company that owned the tank, United States Industrial Alcohol. The company's defense was bold. They argued that the tank hadn't failed because it was badly built. They claimed anarchists had blown it up with a bomb. This was, conveniently, the height of a national anarchist scare. But the evidence did not support them. After years of hearings, an auditor concluded the obvious. The tank walls were too thin, the steel was too brittle, and it had never been safety tested. The company was found responsible and paid out the equivalent of millions in today's money. And here's why it actually matters. This disaster is a big reason engineering and construction in America got serious safety rules. Afterward, building plans had to be signed and stamped by a licensed engineer and reviewed by the city. The molasses flood helped create the system of inspections we still rely on today. For decades afterward, people in the North End swore that, on hot summer days, you could still smell molasses rising up out of the ground. The neighborhood was changed forever by a tank that should never have been built. The Great Molasses Flood is the kind of story that sounds completely made up. A city drowned in syrup. But 21 people really died, all because one man in a hurry painted over the leaks instead of fixing them. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe. Next week, I'm covering another piece of history that sounds completely fake but absolutely happened. Drop a comment with the weirdest disaster you've ever heard of. I might make it into a video. And remember, if your giant tank is leaking, maybe don't just paint it brown.